Those of you who've used your search engines to research the topic of Powering the Planet by John Rosebush are by now pretty familiar with a lot of what he's had to say on this topic. Today, John is going to update us on the subject. He's going to talk about the urgency, the major topics, and the current status. John Rosebush.
Hi, my name is John Rosebush, and it's been a while since I've updated you on the current status of Powering the Planet. Let me just recap what Powering the Planet project is all about. I believe I've created a new energy invention that can power this planet many times over, theoretically forever. I actually believe this new energy invention can create between 500 and 1,000 terawatts of power throughout 80% of the planet through clean, eco-friendly alternative energy. Today I want to give you a few more insights on what this new energy invention can do. But before I do, I want you to know that it's critical that you watch this entire video in order to understand the content of Powering the Planet and the reason why it's so urgent and why it's mankind's most important project it could ever take on in the history of mankind. This new energy invention is based on river flow. River flow is the only potential energy source in the world today that has the ability to power the planet. Wind comes and goes. Solar, it's nighttime, it's daytime. Ocean currents, we know the tide comes in and goes out. Geothermal has the ability to operate as continuous power, but the problem with geothermal is there's not very many places on the planet where we can exploit it. Nuclear power, we know, has the ability to produce continuous power, but the nuclear waste is we just cannot go forward with nuclear power. So what are we stuck with? And it's not only stuck with, it's a good thing. It's river flow. River flow is theoretically continuous. Now sometimes there'll be floods where it could change a little bit, but most 99% of the time, river flow is continuous. It's also very dense versus air. And it has the ability to produce a huge amount of power. We know what a small amount of water flow can do. It can push a car, it can do many things. If you've ever stood in a river and tried to hold up an object in the river with the river current, you realize how strong the current can be, but then it kind of goes away because of the backwash. Well, I've actually harnessed that. What I've done is I've harnessed the entire river, and I've solved the backwash problem. So essentially, I've harnessed the entire energy of a river, which is extremely powerful. That's why the amount of energy that this new energy invention can produce is so great. Now, a lot of people might think, gosh, he hasn't prototyped. Well, I kind of have. I've worked on many prototypes, actually for 8 years. And so I know what works and what don't work. And through all my experiences and all the successes and failures, I actually come up with a design that I know can harness that energy. I'm not like a little bit sure or 50%, I'm 100% sure. So between that and mathematics, we know how much power this new energy source can create. Now someone might say, well gosh, why didn't you just create a prototype? Well, once you absolutely know, I did not want to create a prototype and try to patent it and everything else so it could just be copied like everything else is. Once I figured out the potential, it was critical that I got other people involved. Also, what would a prototype do for this new energy invention? Let's think about that. You know, I'm not a materials engineer. So, however I built this, it would be changed dramatically by top engineers around the world. But I know the proof of concept works. I just did not want to go through just the utility to build it and then turn around and end up with engineers completely changing a complete new material list, much more advanced materials than I'm aware of. Now, someone says, well, gosh, he says he can power the plant. What happens if his numbers are off a little bit? Well, I'll tell you how conservative I was. This new energy invention has the ability to produce, actually I reduced the amount of energy this new energy invention can produce by almost 80%. Almost 80%. So I know that it has the ability to power this planet. I actually think it can create a lot more energy than what I'm projecting. You know, 66% of it was for unknowns and mechanical losses. Now, I know there is a few unknowns, but not very many. Actually, almost none. I can think of one. And how much of a difference would that unknown make? Maybe 10-20%. So what did I do? I reduced the amount of energy by 80%. That's how conservative. Now, what I need is the attention of the world. You know, today, the top 10 countries' reserves are 1,244 billion barrels. Now, we consume 31 billion barrels of oil. That's 40 years. So if you add in reserves from other countries, that's how they come up with the 50 years. Now, let me give you a little understanding of this. The South Dakota, North Dakota shale find was 7.5 billion barrels. Now, how much world consumption time would that be? Less than 4 months. Now, people in the United States call that a game changer. But the oil is one big pool. Because if we produce 7.5 billion more barrels here, the world will just get the oil from somewhere else. So we have to think of the world oil as one big pool of oil, unless we're going to start shorting countries. Okay? Now, there was a huge potential discovery in Australia. 300 billion barrels of oil. Don't that sound like just a huge amount of oil? They talked about a game changer. Now, again, they're not sure, but that's been the talk. You know, that's less than a 10-year supply of oil for the world. 300 billion barrels, which is more oil than Saudi Arabia. Now, some people might say, well, how about the Canadian oil sands? That's not a new discovery. We've known about the Canadian oil sands for 50 years. We know there's 145 billion barrels of oil up in Canadian oil sands. Nobody just ever thought we'd ever go and mine it, literally, with excavators, and then cook it, which burns oil, and then turn around and get the oil out of it and then consume it. You know, ethanol takes 0.8 gallon of diesel fuel to create a gallon of ethanol. So we're not gaining things by these biofuels. You know, ethanol also evaporates a lot more than gasoline does. So a lot of people think it's just a net zero gain from ethanol. It's kind of like a farmer's giveaway. These are the types of things that we're doing to power our planet today. They don't make any sense whatsoever. Now, the oil companies, all right, so they're saying we're going to drill further out in the oceans. We're going to drill in the Arctic. Well, that's because they've released so many fossil fuels and carbon fuels that the Arctic is melting. So now they're going to go up there and they're going to drill for oil. Maybe they find 20 years of it. So now we have 20 more years. We've lived on this planet for thousands of years. So we talking 50 years of oil right now, maybe 60 with the Australia find. Maybe we get up to 80, 90 years in the North Pole. We have 7 billion people living on this planet. What, our future is 70 years from now and then it's going to come to an end? Oh, wait a minute now. The oil companies have also talked about methane underneath the polar ice cap in the North Pole. Now, the methane gas is trapped in ice. They actually call it fire ice. So now, they're wanting to harness that. The problem is some scientists think that if we release that methane hydrates up there, because that's what they are, methane hydrates, that it could actually destroy the planet because of the effects on the ozone of all the methane released. But the oil companies, they think, oh boy, I'll harness that. So that's a lot of this talk that's been going on about the ability to power the planet through a new power source underneath the ocean. Well, it's leaking up there a little bit now. So let me ask you a question. You have a bunch of methane gas trapped in ice and below the ice. How are you going to harness that in an ocean? We're going to put a blanket over the entire ocean? It just does not make any sense whatsoever again. But these are the things the oil companies are pushing at you. Okay? So now let's get away from oil. Let's talk about the new Iter Project, which is going on in Europe. Now, this is the inertial confinement project. In other words, this is kind of like the next step from cold fusion, because they haven't been able to figure out cold fusion for 50 years. So what they've done is they've come up with this new invention where they push a laser into a piece of material, and they use mirrors, and they use magnetics. And there's about 3 or 4 different types. The problem is they've never been able to produce more energy than they put in. But we've heard the President of the United States even talk about, wow, the power of the sun. The problem is it creates the environment becomes disrupted. They cannot control it. In other words, they've kind of like had blowouts. So that's where we're at on that. Now, they've spent $15 billion on that project. And in the year 2032, they think they can generate 3 gigawatts of power. 3 gigawatts. Now, I hate to put a damper on it, but the projection is that the Earth, all the countries on the planet, are going to require 500 gigawatts of power additional every year for the next 20 years into the year 2035, which at that point, the Earth will require 30 terawatts of power of electricity. Now, we're burning up all our fossil fuels. And by the way, 86% of that new energy source for the electricity, they planned from coal. Which now, if we want to talk about coal, if we look at China and India alone, and look at the pollution that's over there. It's crazy. People are wearing medical masks every day. Every day. You imagine walking around with a medical mask? Now, so this is where our country's headed. My new energy invention works. I actually believe I can create a terawatt of power in one site. One site. That's enough energy, electricity, to power China, India, our United States. Now, I believe there's 50,000 places around the world where this new energy invention makes sense. We probably wouldn't install them that many places. But that's where we're at. That's where I'm at. And I haven't asked anybody for any money. I haven't asked anybody for anything. I'm at trying to get the people's attention. Now, you want to talk about urgency, okay? My new energy invention is based on river flow. Remember that from the early on in this video. Okay? By us continuing to completely for the climate change and to get worse and worse, that disrupts the normal water flow in this world. In other words, it melts the ice caps on our mountains, which creates river flow. So the normal cycle of water on our planet gets majorly disrupted. Guess what? That slows up river flow. That makes my new energy invention less effective. And actually, at some point, if it disrupts it enough, it makes it totally ineffective. So I guess at that point, we would depend on the oil companies melting the polar ice cap, trying to capture the methane, and then finally melting the Antarctic, which will change the entire landscape of the entire planet for our future energy needs. Because one way or the other, 7 billion people is going to need energy. And it's going to really need energy. Now, what happens when we run out of oil? We use 31 billion barrels today, and they project it's going to go to 35 billion barrels by the year 2030. Okay? Do you know that 30% of the oil consumed in this country is for feedstocks, for products? There's over 6,000 products in the United States made from oil. These are all the products that make a modern society possible. imagine, again, I've talked about in other videos about all the plastics. All that stuff goes away too. So I don't know where you're at, but the urgency of this does what? This new invention becomes less and less feasible as climate change gets worse and worse. Oil stocks for products, which is so many products that we could talk about that for 10 hours, all go away. That make a modern society possible. So where is the world headed? And I cannot get the attention of the world leaders. You know, it'd be different if I was keep asking for money and you just kept feeding me money, but I can't get your attention. I haven't asked you for a penny. Not for one penny. And you know, it's kind of comical because I believe that scientists and engineers are almost afraid to have a debate with me. You know, what I need is for the scientists and engineers from around the world to go to New York, to the United Nations. And I'll disclose this new energy invention. And we can go forward with this. You know, it really can do what I say it can do. Now, I know there's a lot of engineers and scientists out there and say, God, that river flow is very powerful. And if he actually has figured out a way to harness it, this might work. Well, I'm telling you, it does work. I'm 100% sure. I worked on trying to invent this for 8 years. Now, I may not be this a scientist or even an engineer, but I have a construction background, and I'm very good at out-of-the-box thinking, and I really do use very good common sense. And I actually took, and you scientists and engineers know this, the one possible way to power this planet and worked on it. Because common sense would tell you there is no other way. Now, I know they talk about sunlight and if we could capture all the sunlight, but we haven't. You know, wind and solar really do only make up less than 3% of just the electricity on this planet, the energy for that, let alone running automobiles. You know, I told you this in other videos. We could put solar panels on every single roof in the entire world and not even be able to power the buildings. And, you know, I talked about wind earlier in another video, and I told you that the windmills are only 20% effective, but I didn't tell you all of it. The wind only blows 40% of the time. So a megawatt windmill, the efficiency on it is 20% of it. And then you've got to take 40% of that 20%. Okay? And then we have no way of storing that energy to make it continuous very well whatsoever. So between making the conversions from the electricity that it does generate to storing it and bringing it back, you almost get nothing out of a windmill unless you're using it at the time that you're creating it, which completely eliminates the windmills. If our world doesn't start concentrating on things that will actually work, or at least try to develop things that will actually work, we're done as a planet. We're actually losing ground every year because that 500 gigawatts of demand I talked about earlier, it's going on every year. And we are building coal plants, which means we're becoming more dependent on fossil fuels every year as we talk about alternative energy. And the few projects that we've got going on with alternative energy and how much electricity they can produce is minuscule compared to the demand that continues to grow every year. Same with oil. We have not recaptured in a year the amount of oil that we've used since 1961. Who's maintained us with oil are the Middle Eastern countries. We've actually lost ground on the number of years left on our reserves since 1961. And yet, you know, even the reserves in the Middle East, can we really depend on it? There's a lot of stuff out there that Saudi Arabia will actually be an oil importer by the year 2030. That's a possibility, folks. The Middle Eastern countries and their reserve estimates have been kept very secret, and we're not sure what they are. We're not sure. We guess and we think. That's the problem with all this. These are all guesses. I worked for Marathon Oil Company for 25 years, and we ran one of the largest oil fields in the country, called Yates Oil Field. And, about the year 1980, Mobil Oil Company tried to take over Marathon Oil Company because of Yates. They wanted Yates Oil Field, and they wanted Libya. Okay? But mostly because of Yates Oil. Because it was producing, it was the largest oil field in the United States for about 40 years. And boy, if it just kept on producing, it would have been wonderful. Well, guess what happened about 5-6 years later? That oil field started to fail because the pressure went off it. So within 5-6 years after that, that oil field just became a large oil field. It was no longer a major oil field. So in reality, Mobil, probably a pretty good deal that they didn't take us over, because after a while, we didn't even think of it as a major oil field at all, because the pressure come off the field. So what are they doing with fracking? Okay, let's talk about fracking. They're fracking for natural gas. Now, they've done it out west, and we know they've hurt some water. In the oil business, because I worked in the oil business for 25 years, there's always been kind of like, there's a between the oil and the water, there's always been a barrier, and that's kind of been sacred, because we never wanted to mix the oil and water thing. I mean, that just makes common sense. So that little oil barrier, that little barrier in between, that was really, really a very sacred thing. Well, not no more, because now our gas fracking, guess what we're doing? We're putting so much pressure underneath the ground, we don't know where it's fracturing. That's why they've had problems with water and gas out west. Well, out west, if let's look at the different landscapes of United States. Out west, it's kind of sandy. So, if you take a piece of dynamite and you put it underneath a bunch of dirt and you blow it up, and that sand will kind of fill in itself, won't it? Well, guess what? In the eastern part of the United States, it's hard rock formations. That's why earthquakes in the east are so much more severe than in the west, when they do happen. They don't happen very often, but when they do, it's very severe, because it's all hard rock out there. Guess where all the people are? In the eastern part of the United States. So guess what happens when you gas fracture in the east? It may not have happened, it may have already happened. They're going to fracture, which means they pump down millions of gallons of water, etc., etc. And they're going to fracture that ground. They don't know where they're going to fracture it. And if natural gas gets into our large aquifers in the eastern part of our country because of desperation for energy, it's going to destroy our fresh water source. Now, the Great Lakes is over 20% of the fresh water of the entire planet. That's the type of stuff that's going on. Now, you say, well, gosh, we need to put pressure down. We've been doing that for years out west. We've been pumping natural gas back into oil wells to keep the pressure up. We pump steam, polymers, all kinds of things. Actually, in Wyoming, we had something called the huff and puff, which means we pump down a bunch of steam. Boom. Now we pump, because the oil was so heavy. We've been doing these types of things for years, but we have never, ever done pumped the amount of fluids and done the fracturing that they're doing with the gas fracking today. Now, some might say, well, we need the energy. Well, is that if we destroy our water source, okay, for the amount of natural gas that we're going to get from the east, is it worth it? You have to say to yourself. Now, we have fresh water problems all over the world. Go out in the world map, go out on all the subjects that I'm talking about. Look these things up on the internet. Everything I'm telling you is factual. That's why the urgency of what I'm requesting that you do is come up with a worldwide project to implement this new invention that I've done. First thing is I've got to get to the people. People need to step up. I don't know where the media has been or anybody. Now, I don't really blame the media because you know why? They don't have the understanding. But the scientists and engineers know what I'm talking about. And all the scientists and engineers that are watching this video, you need to tell your other scientists and engineers this needs to get reconciled. The scientists and engineers around the world need to come together for mankind's survival. We are literally talking about our survival. Now, the United States is so wrapped up with their politics and with their social things going on, they are not going to assist. I've attempted to get to them. General Electric is so tied up with so many companies, they think they can make money no matter what happens. So they're not stepping up. Siemens hasn't stepped up. But, you know, this is for China and India. You make up over 40% of the people on this planet. If anybody has responsibility to step up, it's you. And you're huge oil importers, both of you. This actually has the ability to power your countries. I actually think in China I can produce 100 terawatts of power. That's 100 times the amount of electricity used today. In India, you're pretty dang close to that too. Now, what does that do? That allows you to completely modernize your country in a clean environment. You know, even the oil that you have, it's going to continue to be worth more and more for oil products, just for oil products. Because as we run out of it, we're still going to need plastics, asphalt, etc., etc., etc. It's not going to hurt you. But if you don't change and change now, it's going to destroy this planet. Literally destroy this planet. You know, I know we don't like to do things until we actually have a catastrophe. Well, if we wait on this, the catastrophe may not be able to, we may not be able to come back from it. Once we start having major oil shortages, we're going to have wars over oil. Nobody's going to be wanting to cooperate with anybody. Now, why don't I just give this to the world? Well, you know what, China and India, you have a lot of poor people in your country, but you also have, you're large enough, you have a lot of intelligent people. So if I give this to you, you have the ability to just install this. Forget about the rest of the world. And China, you kind of are internal looking country anyway. You're not looking external. It looks like you have in the last year or two, but most of your history is internal. But you know, there's many countries around the world, many, that are very poor nation, poor and don't have the ability, don't have the institutions or the intelligent people to install this. Now, the entire planet needs to install this. This cannot be country by country or company by company. So the world has to come together. And I want to give you this. And if you don't think this will work, it works. I don't even have, I'd be willing to stand in front of a firing squad and get shot if it didn't work. And I haven't asked anybody for a penny. That's how sure I am. What am I trying to do? I'm trying to help mankind. But in order for mankind to get this, they need to understand the urgency. And the urgency is so real. You know, if we use up all our oil and then we convert over, well, then I guess all those 7,000 products the United States makes isn't necessary. But they must be necessary. We'll be producing them today. Do you understand? This will be one of the last videos I produce. I'm trying to bring the world together. You know, let's say you go along with me and my new energy invention works. What's the worst thing that could happen? We produce a huge amount of alternative energy, and we keep our oil, right? What happens if you go along with me and my energy invention don't work? Well, then you just kind of throw me out of the United Nations. The world moves on. What happens if you don't go along with me and everything that we've talked about here is true? Well, then guess what? We have 7 billion people that are left without any energy and without any resources. And it becomes more than likely the destruction of mankind. Because countries like, and I don't want to pick on Pakistan, but it could be any of them, like Pakistan with nuclear weapons, is not going to sit around where other countries may have done better with alternative energy than they have. It will be a nuclear war. And it will destroy mankind. Now, for all you religious nuts out there, if you want to go to heaven and you think everybody should, then we can line you up and we can send you off to heaven. But for the normal man that wants to live on this planet, it's critical that we go forward. What happens if my new energy invention works and half the planet converts over? We have the same issues as if none of the planet. I really am trying to bring the planet together. What's it going to hurt, even if my invention don't work and the scientific community comes together in New York at the United Nations and discusses powering the planet? Guess what? Then they learn from one another. And possibly this issue gets elevated enough to where they actually take on a project with or without my invention. There's no downside here. This is all about bringing the planet together. This is the end of the update, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. And maybe there'll be one or two more updates, but I've got to bring the world together one way or the other. So I hope this helps. I thank you for watching this video, and have a nice day.